And now on the line is Anne O'Mahony. Anne worked for Concern Worldwide for 38 years since 1982 and has recently retired from working with Concern. Anne, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Okay, cool. Anne, could you start off by telling me a bit about your background, please, and how it was that you started working for Concern in 1982?
Well, when I was growing up, I grew up in Bandon in West Cork, and the Bandon mission and the Catholic mission at that stage in Cork had a twinning with the mission in Peru, in Trujillo. And at that stage, when I was in school, we see a lot of priests and nuns coming back from what we called the missions in Peru, coming into our class to talk about life in Peru and the type of work that they were doing. And I suppose it awoke a bit of an interest in me that maybe that was one of the things I would like to do. I also had an uncle who was a priest in Birmingham, and he was very involved in the early days of Amnesty International. And in the 80s, you know, we used to send postcards to prisoners of conscience around the world. So my uncle would send us a list every year. We'd write these letters to these prisoners in parts of the world that I only knew by looking up a map. And I suppose it gave us, and it certainly gave me, an awareness of social injustice, and it gave me awareness of, you know, how small things can actually affect change. So I felt then that for me, one of the ways to affect change was to actually work overseas myself, to follow that spirit of both adventure and wanting to affect change.
That's cool, yeah. I read the feature article by Deirdre Falvey in the Irish Times about you at the beginning of last month. I found it to be very good. This is a big question, and feel free to go into as much depth as you want or not. But can you tell me or give me a summary of the evolution of your work in Concern from 1982 up until last month?
I will indeed. That's a very long question, but I'll give it a start anyway. So I started as a volunteer in 82, and I think at that stage, with Concern, everybody started overseas as a volunteer. So you went out for 2 years, and during that time, you didn't come home during that period of time. We had limited contact with home because, you know, there was no regular phone calls, there was no WhatsApps and Facebooks and the various social media. So we went away, we wrote home every week, we phoned home at Christmas. I started work in Thailand, working with the Cambodian refugees. And I had a limited idea, really, of even where Thailand was before going out. I knew it was somewhere over near Vietnam. And I had a limited idea, really, of the types of issues that I would be facing. We were working on the Thai-Cambodian border with refugees that had fled the genocidal Pol Pot regime in Cambodia. They had come over in really bad condition. I was working in one of the border camps where the Vietnamese were attacking these camps on a regular basis. I learned at an early stage how to look at issues of security, learned about how to control and manage my own environment. We learned how to do things like use these two-way radios where if level 1 was called, we knew we had to be aware there was something happening in the area. If level 2 was called over this radio, we had to think about evacuating. Level 3 was evacuate, and level 4 was hit the dust. So it was in that environment then that we started engaging in feeding centres, looking at really vulnerable populations that were very malnourished. And I suppose that was my first job with Concern, was managing a feeding centre in a refugee camp on the border.
Right. Okay.
So,
go ahead. Yeah.
So I went from there then to Ethiopia as for my second year with Concern. I went to Ethiopia because there was an emerging famine there, and this was in 83. And if you remember, the famine didn't hit the headlines until 84, but I was there really for the big build-up to it, when supplies were very limited, when we were camped next to a big refugee camp of very malnourished people. And we started working straight away. And it was, again, it was quite an eye-opening experience for me. So I suppose that those were the formative years, Darren. And, I was able to take it then from there to Somalia, from Somalia to Sudan, and then various other countries around the world. So I spent about, 26 years in total living and working in different parts of Africa, mainly in times of conflict and also when countries were at their lowest ebb, really.
Yeah, I know that some professions in Ireland, teachers and Gardaí, I believe, can retire after 30 years. So I have to say fair play to you for sticking in the humanitarian sector we're concerned since 1982. And what were the most challenging jobs you had working with concern? I assume that Ethiopia and Somalia were very challenging, yeah?
Ethiopia and Somalia were very challenging, but also some of the other places as well. I worked in Sierra Leone during the civil war in '96, and again, Sierra Leone, it was one of these much lower profile, much more forgotten emergencies at that stage. There was a level of cruelty going on there at the time with some dreadful revolutionary forces going on there. There was a lot of hardship. I then expanded that program into what was happening in Liberia at the time. So those were very challenging times. I then worked in Rwanda following the genocide there. My first formal meeting with the government in Rwanda, having arrived there, was to go to a commemoration to mark the anniversary of the genocide. And what they were doing at that stage in that commemoration ceremony was reburying people who had been buried in mass graves. And I think the smell of that stays with you in your memory forever. But I suppose one of the biggest things about working in Rwanda really was that it was a country that was so damaged, but was desperately struggling to pull itself together after this horrific genocide had taken place. And we saw neighbours living beside each other who knew who had done the killing in each other's families. And to live and work in that environment was incredibly difficult. We had a wonderful staff member working with us at the time, Olive. And Olive looked after us all very well. But then Olive would go into complete withdrawal for weeks on end. And, she'd be physically present, but just not there at all. The trauma, and then the lack of services to support people through that trauma because the numbers were so big. We found it certainly incredibly challenging to work in that type of environment.
During the 80s, and I was actually only born in 1981, a year before.
Sorry about that.
I'm very aware that in the 80s you had Live Aid. It was 85, and I think Live Aid started because of Ethiopia. I think what was going on at that time, I believe, in all your years working with concern Ethiopia and Rwanda and other places, you were dealing on the cold face, I assume, or I imagine, with a lot of people who were dying of hunger and war, that happened. It must have been very challenging.
I'm afraid it was. Yes, you're absolutely right about Live Aid, and I think we're very proud that it was a Dublin man Bob Geldof, who kick-started all of that. And certainly Bob came out to visit us in he came out to visit us in Ethiopia on many different occasions, and we hosted him in Harbo, in the camp that I was in charge of for a period of time. So we were very familiar with the whole build-up to Live Aid. Of course, I didn't see Live Aid because we were in the field, and it was in the days before that big mass communication. But we got the videos afterwards, so we were able to play them back. And I suppose for me, being in Ethiopia at the time, it was very encouraging, I suppose, to understand that there was a world outside the bubble that we were in that completely understood what we were doing and what we were trying to achieve. We were dealing, Darren, with death every day. We were dealing with huge trauma. We were dealing with. There's nothing worse than watching a mother trying to reconcile herself to the fact that she couldn't feed her child. And there's something fundamentally wrong with that. There's something wrong with the fact that a mother has to go through something like that when we have a world that's full of food and that there is just not enough to eat. And, I saw mothers desperately trying to divide the food so that the stronger children had a better chance of surviving than a child who was actually dying. And these are incredibly difficult, unconscious decisions that mothers have to make when food is scarce. And we dealt with that on a daily basis when I was in Ethiopia. And I think it changes you for life. And I think there would be many people listening to your program that would have worked with us in Ethiopia at the time, who would remember those dark days and the struggle that we had to make the food that we had go far enough to feed the people that needed it. And I suppose linked into the feeding aspect then, once children begin to eat, if they have been malnourished for a while, they begin to experience an awful lot of the other illnesses. They have all these dormant bugs in their system that are awakened as well once food comes into the system, so they just get incredibly sick. So we were dealing with very sick, very malnourished children at a time of limited supplies, and it was tough decision making.
I know that things have improved a lot over the last 30, 40 years, but people still today in the world die of hunger, don't they?
People still die of hunger, and that is the shame of all of us, really. As I say, there is enough food to go around. There is enough food to feed everybody. I suppose there are two big game changers in all of this. One is conflict. And, in the countries that we're working in at the moment, conflict and war, both civil war and international war, is the driving force for an awful lot of the hardship that people are facing. People are driven out of their homes where they had been growing enough food, where they had been able to survive, into refugee camps or into displaced areas where sometimes it's impossible to get to support to them until it's too late. And very often we're seeing people that are displaced, they settle in an area, they begin to establish links and begin to find survival mechanisms, and then they become displaced again and again and again. And it erodes people's ability to be able to survive in such situations. And I think these are the biggest challenges that we're dealing with at the moment. It's conflict that underlines the hardship. And if you're struggling on the edge of survival, and then something comes and changes that, then it is going to tip you over the edge from chronic poverty into an emergency situation. And I think that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about conflict. I suppose we're also looking at what climate change is doing. And we're very much working on the cutting edge of climate change. We are seeing where small changes have dramatic effects on people's lives. If the rains come a little bit late, when do you plough and plant? And what if you plough and plant too soon and the rains don't arrive and your harvest for the coming year is wasted because you don't have money to buy a new set of seeds for when the rain comes? Or it might rain too early, and then you've missed the planting season altogether. So these are the struggles that people living on the edge are struggling to survive with all the time. And I suppose then the third big issue, and it's the big issue that we're dealing with at the moment that's cross-cutting everything, is COVID and the impact of COVID. And again, it is one of the things that is driving people over the edge from chronic poverty into an emergency situation. There was, and very proudly led by Ireland, the development goals were agreed globally.
The UN global goals, yeah. Go ahead.
The UN global goals. And there was a huge buy-in across the world, and Ireland's own ambassador to the UN delivered it at the time. but there was a huge effort across the world to work towards these SDGs. And, you know, there was, I suppose, over the last couple of years, a real sense that progress was being made. And while not all the goals would be achieved, there was substantial progress in that direction. But unfortunately, COVID has pushed everything back hugely. We're seeing increasing numbers of people who are hungry, and it's not because of the COVID illness itself. It's much more related to the closing down of opportunities for jobs. You know, we work with people that if they don't earn money, they don't eat. So farmers are not getting their produce into market because markets are closed. The garment industry has virtually closed down to a large extent across the world, and you know, it's the piecemeal workers who don't get paid, and they're the ones that support and feed their families. Now they don't get paid, so they don't have the money to buy the food to feed their families. And I suppose most of the countries that we're working in don't have the social protection programs that we're lucky enough to have here in Ireland.
Okay, and I won't keep you a lot longer. I want to go back. I have a question about people who are hungry. I looked at the UN World Food Programme website recently, and they said that the number of people who are kind of chronically in need of food aid has increased. I think it's 260 million at the moment. But it also says 600 million people go to bed hungry every day. I'm just wondering what's the difference between these two sets of people, like, you know?
I think the people who go to bed hungry every night are those are the ones we wouldn't really class as malnourished, but we would class them as people who are living on the edge of extreme poverty. Okay. They do various things to cut down their food needs. They buy cheaper foods. You know, they'll live on rice without the good stuff of the vegetables that add the value. So they're the sort of people who are very hungry on a regular basis. They just don't have enough to eat. The ones that are on the edge of emergency, they're the ones that actually are the ones that are going into crisis at this point in time. Okay. And they're the ones that we all have to support to pull them back from the edge.
Okay, we'll talk about COVID again now in a minute. Just a question. Can you tell me, despite all your hard work working abroad with Concern over the years and working with people who are dying, can you tell me if you found your job rewarding?
You know, I've got an awful lot more out of this job than I ever put into it. You know, we talk about people who have not survived, but I suppose for me the privilege has been seeing the people that have survived. You know, we have helped an enormous amount of people, and that has been very much part of my input and part of the legacy of Concern in terms of the people that we reach on an annual basis. And of course, it is with the support of the Irish people. We certainly wouldn't be able to do it without support from your listeners and from various other people. But we actually translate that into saving lives. You know, you see the malnourished pictures on television, but we have the privilege of staying behind and helping these people get back on their feet. We have the privilege of being able to get the food, to get the medicines, but also to put them then on the long-term journey of recovery, because we don't just feed and go. We also help them to work with them to help them develop stronger farming systems, cope with the changing environments. We do a lot. We can't do it all, and sometimes circumstances, and war is the biggest thing, and conflict that undoes so much of the stuff that we try to do. If you take war out of the equation, then I think all our jobs would be so much easier, and certainly the alleviation of poverty would be much easier. I suppose we also have innovated a lot over the years. We have done tremendous amounts of work on changing the way we deal with malnutrition. We don't bring all the children now into a central location. We enable children to stay in their homes. Hopefully we will never see again those huge famine centres that we saw in that the images are so full of in Ethiopia and Somalia, because we now have the technology and the ability and the skills to be able to keep children in their homes, to enable their mothers to feed them safely with food that is good, properly developed to meet their needs, and safe to eat without having to dilute with contaminated water or any of the issues and challenges that a mother would be facing. So the results of those have been very good, and Concern certainly pioneered that approach. And now the rest of the world, the rest of the developing world is using those same approaches. We have worked with governments, we have worked with different communities around the world to change the way the whole of malnutrition is dealt with. I suppose the other good innovation that we did, and you know, my team was the first team to do it when I was working in Kenya, was we looked at using mobile phone technology to do cash transfers. And we did that after the election violence in 2008. We were the first organisation to do it. And it enabled money to go directly into the hands of people that were badly in need, who could go round to the market next door and buy the food. Very often, certainly in famine situations and in areas of great need, it's not about food availability. It's about the ability of people to buy that food. You know yourself. The shelves can be full of food, but if you don't have the money to buy it, then it might as well be in Timbuktu. So by enabling them to receive the money on the mobile phone and then go and buy it immediately, we're able to cut out a huge amount of angst in terms of trucking, in terms of loading, in terms of warehousing, in terms of distributions, by giving money directly to the people. And that is actually quite revolutionary in terms of getting the aid directly into the hands of the people as quickly as possible with no messing.
And that's very common nowadays, isn't it, in the developing countries? Isn't it?
It's very common now, and it's one of these wonderful things that, you know, you try it out, and this is what we did. We piloted in a small area. We got somebody to evaluate it, and we published the information, and it just caught on, because it's a no-brainer when you think about it. But the technology has to be there to enable it to be delivered. So it was about taking a technology that was just at the beginning of existence, because when the first transfer that we did, and we did it to 567 people, I think, the first time we did it, and it caused the whole telephone system to crash. And, you know, I think Vodafone were up all night in London trying to get the Kenya phone system back up, because we had caused it to crash by doing a distribution to 500 people. Now we can do hundreds of thousands. And so the technology is there to enable it to happen. But it is, and that was only 12 years ago. So it's about taking advantage of emerging technologies to enable us to get the best value from them, and to enable us then to work with the people that we want to support to the best of our ability.
Oh, that's great. I have read over the last few years about the cash transfers. I know they're, as you said, they're fairly common now. It's great news. And using Concern were the first NGO in the world to do it, were you?
We were the first one to do it as part of an emergency response.
Okay.
So we did it. We did it in Kenya. Yeah. In early 2008, and that was the first time. Okay. So that was quite exciting.
I was going to ask you. I think you've already answered this question about COVID. Like, bearing in mind the situation with COVID, like, I think it's too soon to say maybe to answer the question. But do you think things are going in the right direction for the people Concerned work with in the developing world?
I think you're right. I think at this stage it's too soon to say. We're not seeing the numbers across the different countries, but I think that's much more due to a lack of testing than it is, you know, in the places that we work with and with the populations that we work with. A lot of people die on a reasonably regular basis from upper respiratory tract infection. And to do a differential diagnosis between upper respiratory tract infection and COVID, it's quite difficult if you don't have the facilities and the testing ability. So it's hard to know when people are ill what they're ill from. It just could be a chest infection, you know. So it's quite difficult. It's quite difficult from our perspective. For me, the impact of COVID is much more around what has happened with people's jobs, with their ability to move around, the impact on the education system, and I suppose much more importantly, the impact on women and equality. I think it has taken a huge setback in the countries that we're working in. So I think gains that have been made over the last couple of years, over the last few years with the SDGs, I think we are seeing them being rapidly undermined and rapidly undone with the single pandemic that is devastating all our worlds, really, but especially the people that we work with overseas.
Okay, yeah, I've done a good few interviews since last March about COVID, talking to different people, including talking to Breda Gahan, who you know from Concern.
Yes, of course.
I've done loads of interviews with Breda over the years about HIV/AIDS, but we did one about COVID as well in March or April. Okay, and to come towards the end of the interview, I don't know what you plan to get up to now that you're retired from Concern. I don't know if you want to tell us a bit about that, but I hope you enjoy your retirement anyway, you know.
Thank you very much. At the moment, I have no plans, and at the moment, because we're all locked up and locked down, it's quite difficult to make plans. But when I need one, I will. At the moment, I'm enjoying actually resting and sort of gathering thoughts and sorting out my life and reflecting on things that have gone on. So we'll see what happens after COVID. It's very hard to think clearly while this is all around, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll definitely come back to you again for another interview.
Sure,
I'll probably leave it a few months or later in the year, but I'll do that. Okay.